If you lie to the government, they'll put you in prison. But when they lie to all of us, it's called being a politician. You think taking guns away will save our kids from the killings, but you're pro-choice, abortion kills way more children. If America's so terrible and racist, it probably isn't safe to encourage immigration. Just saying, all the contradictions are embarrassing. You know who hates America the most? Americans. But we are all the same. We are red, white, and blue. Ashamed to be American? Okay, that's cool. Because honestly, we are all ashamed of you too.
Y'all are so fake. Oh no. The forecast said that there'd be snowflakes. Whoa.
And it's that time once again. Wide right turn here on Just Blame Joey Live. You know, we've been spending quite a few weeks bringing you some pretty heavy stuff. I think it goes all the way back to the original assassination attempt on former, future, and now President-elect Donald Trump. It's just been a lot of dark, heavy conversation over the last few weeks with Tom Kelly. So we're going to bring Tom back, and we're going to try to lighten it up and talk about a subject that, you know, really isn't that polarizing or making that many people angry or that big of a problem, I guess. Today we're going to dive into abortion, and that is probably the last piece of levity you're going to hear on the show today. But Tom is heading into the state house. We have had a recent opinion from that Teton County judge, and the Wyoming abortion bans or the laws for Wyoming regulating its own abortion processes has failed. And there's some questions about the opinion and is definitely going to the Supreme Court. But I have no doubt it's a topic that's going to come up under Tom's tenure. So Tom, welcome back. How you doing today, bud?
I'm doing great. I thought maybe we were on the two different pages today. I was looking kind of confused. You're talking about levity, and I'm like, that's just Joey pushing people's buttons again. Yeah, so we talk about things like civil war and suicide and abortion, because these are the topics that are the most difficult to talk about, because we're seeing that all over the state right now. You have different topics on gun control. People have different topics on religion. They have different topics on abortion. And you find people that can no longer even speak to one another anymore. I mean, we see this movement across the country now with these people saying that anybody who voted for Donald Trump, it's not even safe for women to be around people who voted for Donald Trump. And this comes down to his past history, taking liberties with people. And of course that he's been predominantly considered a pro-life president because of his appointments to the Supreme Court that led to the Dobbs decision, which overturn the abomination of a decision, Roe versus Wade. And I'm saying that from a political and legal standpoint. I mean, even far left abortion champion Ruth Bader Ginsburg said it was a terrible decision and would probably eventually get overturned. But Trump campaigned on leaving things to the states. As people said, he's going to ban abortion, as if a president could just sign an edict and suddenly abortion would disappear. I mean, if the president had that power, Barack Obama would have made guns disappear across the country if he could have. So it is left to the states currently, because the Supreme Court overturned the Roe decision, which overrode the laws of all 50 states. And again, we reverted back to state control. And you'd figure in a state such as Wyoming, with other states having put in not total bans on abortion, but very strict restrictions, leaving very narrow circumstances in which they would be still allowable, is something that Wyoming attempted and failed. Now, why do I say we failed? This is something that's very difficult to talk about for most people. I've been quiet about it since the decision came out of Teton County, because immediately the political pundits, politicians, social media just exploded in the typical dichotomous division of gloating versus anger and complaining. And there have been very few level-headed discussions I've seen on where do we go from here, although people are starting to calm down, so I figured this would be a good time to talk about it, right around Thanksgiving time. So we have the Teton County District Court Judge, Melissa Owens, struck down 2 pro-life laws. One was essentially a ban on mechanical abortions, I guess you could say, and the other on chemical warfare on babies. Okay, yeah, I'm definitely biased on this issue, and I'm not here to be completely objective, but I am here to try to speak in a rational, level-headed manner because people are so emotional about this. I saw a column by, I think, one of your and David's favorite columnists, Tom Lubnow, and I thought he did quite a good job of rationally explaining what the arguments were, what happened in the court, and where we might go from here. So I'm going to read an excerpt from it because I think he does a really good job of explaining exactly what had happened. The healthcare, this is from his article, Healthcare Freedom Amendment contained in Article 1, Section 38, which says, A, each competent adult shall have the right to make his or her own healthcare decisions. The parent, guardian, or legal representative of any other natural person shall have the right to make healthcare decisions for that person. B, any person may pay and a healthcare provider may accept direct payment for healthcare without imposition of penalties or fines for doing so. C, the legislature may determine reasonable and necessary restrictions on the rights granted under this section to protect the health and general welfare of the people or to accomplish the other purposes set forth in the Wyoming Constitution. D, the state of Wyoming shall act to preserve these rights from undue governmental infringement. He continues on with his own words of what I just said right there. Then he continues with, the judge held the right to make one's own health care decision is a fundamental right. If a right is a fundamental right, then the court will require the state to prove a compelling interest narrowly tailored to meet the government interest in infringing upon that right. If the state cannot prove that compelling interest, then the law infringing on the right will be held unconstitutional. So, the court held that an abortion is, quote, health care. Since an abortion is considered health care, the state of Wyoming was obligated to prove it had a compelling interest in stopping abortions. The court rejected the state's argument that the fetus had rights which should be weighed in the abortion situation, and the decision was the mother's alone. So that's his explanation of what the court decision was. And of course, we had people come out there and say, legislating from the bench, left-wing activists, overturning the will of the people. But a lot of it was emotional reaction to what happens when somebody gets a court decision they don't like. We see it from the left all the time. Well, we need to rein in the Supreme Court. We need to expand the court. We don't like the court's decision, so now we have to challenge the judges as being right-wing maniac fascists. Well, we're seeing a similar emotional reaction from pro-life people on this, that this judge is out of control. But let's go to the judge's own words here. From the decision, it says, the defendants have not established a compelling governmental interest to exclude pregnant women from fully realizing the protections afforded by the Wyoming Constitution during the entire term of their pregnancies, nor have the defendants established that the abortion statutes accomplish their interest. The court concludes that the abortion statutes suspend a woman's right to make her own healthcare decisions during the entire term of a pregnancy and are not reasonable or necessary to protect the health and general welfare of the people. Well, obviously, we have severely, diametrically opposed views on what constitutes life or health, or what even constitutes healthcare. But in the state of Wyoming, we do have the 2012 amendment that did say people were allowed to make their own healthcare decisions without the government getting involved. Now, before anybody gets all upset with me thinking I'm siding with this judge, that she ruled correctly on this, no, that's not what I'm saying here at all. Well, what I am saying here is this: she didn't pull this decision just completely out of left field. There is an amendment on which it was based. Healthcare procedures are often done by licensed medical professionals. Abortions, prescriptions for abortions come from healthcare providers. Now, we argue about, is this actually healthcare or not? But I'd like to, we'll come back to that right now. But we really have to be realistic in the fact that this is a judge who comes from the worldview that an unborn child is not a human being. And this is a logical end to that horrifically misguided view of unborn life, but it is a view that a large percentage of the country and a large percentage of people in Wyoming hold. So it's not completely unreasonable. It is not some fringe outlying decision. It is just one that goes against how many of us interpret what healthcare is. I've heard people argue the point that it is not up for a judge to define what healthcare is. It's the legislature. That's a valid point. And the Supreme Court might rule that the judge overstepped at this point, defining what a term is when the legislature had attempted to do it. Quite frankly, I have to be honest, I have not read the entire text of both of these laws that have been struck down right now. So I don't know off the top of my head how well healthcare was defined, or if the statute came flat out. Do you know if the statute came flat out and said abortion is not healthcare?
It didn't specifically state abortion is not healthcare or define what the specific term healthcare meant.
Okay, so yeah, and of course, when I'm in the legislature, I will be much more judiciously looking through every word of a bill, but I wasn't part of these. So we see people with pro-life positions, which it seems to be almost exclusively Republicans now, such as Rachel Rodriguez Williams, the chair of the Freedom Caucus, and incoming Speaker of the House, Chip Nyman, even Governor Gordon, saying that they completely disagree with this decision, that it's outside the what the mainstream of people in Wyoming wanted, and that Governor Gordon has promised to appeal that decision, and he even make overtures to the legislature to maybe, if the Supreme Court were to rule, the Wyoming Supreme Court, that uphold this ruling, that the Constitution could be amended at that point. So which way forward? Before I start moving in that direction and which way forward, I'd like to get your input. I mean, where you're coming from, of how you view this decision and the aftermath of the decision so far.
Well, there's lots of moving parts here in a situation or on an issue that a lot of people think should be black and white. And I think it's a little problematic. You did an interview with me when you were a candidate. I asked the same question to just about every person that I interviewed. Sometimes I went to a different platform question, but even in the Republican Party platform, the keystone argument that we have is our first plank, the right to life. I've not challenged it. I think it's poorly defined, the same way the law is poorly defined, the same way I think this judge's opinion is based on, I'm one of the people that think, hey, you defined that yourself and did not look at the totality of Title 35 and kind of leaned back into what the intent of the original constitutional amendment was. Now, remember, the 2012 constitutional amendment had nothing to do with abortion. It was about giving a path forward for people to be able to avoid Obamacare. It was saying you can make your own healthcare decisions. None of these death panels, none of these government ordered, you must get vaccinated. You have to go see this doctor, and you're allowed to pay for your doctor yourself or use your own private insurance. You are not forced to pay for government mandated healthcare, because that was the original thing with Obamacare. It was supposed to be mandatory for everybody. But when you look at the wording, I think poorly defined. Now, the Wyoming Republican Party platform, and you brought up, it's mostly just the Republicans and some specific people that are going to fight staunchly for this, and I applaud them, but the platform doesn't say anti-abortion. It doesn't even talk about abortion or babies at all. It says the inherent right to life from conception to natural death. And I get what that means, and most conservatives get what that means, but I continue to stand on the foundation of our platform isn't written down for us. We know what these principles are. We know why they exist and what they're there for. They're for the people that don't, not just outside of the party saying, this is what we believe, please join us in our cause. There's a lot of people in the party that either just want to be a part of something or take the very basic killing babies is bad argument and run with it without any type of understanding of what the words in that plank mean and what the fight for life or the right to life is. So the question I always asked, and I believe I asked you, was, well, we also believe in the Second Amendment. And if you believe in the right to life as an inherent right from conception to natural death, and the Second Amendment and the Fourth Amendment. Your right to own and protect your property and not be deprived of your property without cause and a properly sworn warrant. The Fifth Amendment, you can't be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. So somebody comes onto your property trying to steal your stuff or do your family or you harm, pop them, right? Chick, chick, boom, or whatever the soundbite is for that. And people say, well, I think that is kind of a natural death. It's not. We need to better define those terms. And I have never said that I am a pro-life person, because I'm not. I am pro-innocent life. The elderly, the disabled, those who can't defend themselves, the unborn. Yes, but you break into my house. It's not that I think your life is worth less than the stuff I'm protecting. It's that I think you've already made that decision and you decided your life was worth less than the stuff I'm protecting. But I wouldn't go as far as calling it a natural death. And I've gone rounds when I was a legislative candidate with Wyoming Right to Life of specifically having to tell them, no, I'm for the death penalty. I'm for individual protection of yourself, your property, and your family that could result in the death of another person because, as I learned the hard way in court, no warning shots. There should be no maiming or injuring of people if you're defending yourself with a firearm. So I think that part of it is the way we're actually saying things. And a lot of people don't want to change the platform. Oh, we get it. Well, it's not for us. Well, the law is the same way. The law does not have Title 35, the Wyoming Health and Safety Statutes, no definition for health care. But it does have definitions for things like live birth, stillbirth, and what is a dead body. And it's interesting in what those definitions are. And I don't know that the judge truly considered them when thinking about life. But this argument wasn't about life. This argument was about the language in the proposed or past legislation versus this constitutional provision for healthcare. But in Title 35, live birth is defined as the complete expulsion or extraction from its mother of a fetus, which after such expulsion or extraction breathes or shows any other evidence of life, such as a beating of the heart, pulsation of the umbilical cord, or definite movement of voluntary muscles, whether or not the umbilical cord has been cut or the placenta is attached. So that, in my mind, is the closest thing we have to a definition of life. That's the definition of live birth from our statutes. A stillbirth is defined as something that is a birth that after 20 completed weeks of gestation, in which the child shows no evidence of life after complete birth. And the definition of a dead body means a lifeless human body or such severed parts of the human body or bones thereof, the state of which is reasonably considered that death has occurred. So we have those when you're considering life. And I still don't think those are clear enough. But our Constitution says you have the right to make your own health care decisions. And I think we need to specifically line out health care. And I'm getting to the judge's decision. I know I took the long way around, but this is a big issue for me. And clarity, I think, is terribly important because I see a lot of zealots out there on both sides of the argument that have no idea what they're really talking about. And they contradict themselves all the time, which delegitimizes the argument. And I hate being on a team that just goes out with a big rally posture. Yeah, we're going to go get them. Yeah, but you don't know what you're talking about. You look like a bunch of idiots. And when we lose, it's not going to be because we weren't excited enough. But healthcare, as the judge has defined it in this, means any medical procedure, any surgical procedure, any elective procedure, or any drug you want to put in your body. The government doesn't have a right to say no. The government doesn't have a right to regulate it. The government doesn't have a right to deny you the right to do that. Because an abortion that does not have anything to do with the life of the mother, which was included in the bill, it was included in the law that she struck down, is an elective procedure that has no medical benefit. You're not saving the mom's life, because if you were, then it wouldn't be an abortion and it's already defined in the law. So you said something about all these doctors are licensed medical practitioners. Everybody who prescribes this pill is a licensed medical practitioner. Well, the state also licensed people like tattoo artists, and they cut into people's bodies and they add things and take things away and they ink up people's bodies. That's a medical procedure. You're breaching the skin. You are sometimes doing surgical procedures. Dentists, the same thing. Putting stuff in and out of people's bodies that they would not die if they didn't have that done. And my concern is the way that her opinion is written, it opens up the doors to nullifying Chloe's law. It's an elective surgical procedure that is not necessary for health or for care. But now the court says, no, you have the right to make your own healthcare decisions. Well, where is the health and where is the care in these procedures? Just because it's surgical, just because it's medical, what's next? nose jobs and boob jobs have to be not only given to everybody, but at taxpayer expense. That is a surgical procedure that is not healthcare. So I think we opened up a big door here, or she opened up a big door here. And this is why definition, and you're going to see this when you go into the legislature, unintended consequences and the clarity of the wording of laws and proper definitions of words that you use in laws, because they will interpret or ignore things that will affect other things. So right now I'm concerned that, because the other law, the second law that was struck down, had to do with the chemical abortions. But the judge now said, no, you have the right to put anything in your body you want because it's healthcare. So how many illicit, illegal, whatever drugs have you just technically argued are legal? Because you're allowed to put whatever you want, especially if you're just trying to kill your baby. The decision is concerning, not because of what it is, but because of how it was so poorly defined, spoken in contradiction to so many other things we already have in law, and really ignoring the fact that things like life of the mother was already included in the law. So all the other arguments about health care are moot.
So as an incoming legislator to the legislature, this could all be a moot point if the Wyoming Supreme Court takes it up and reverses the decision and the laws go into effect. Then it's taken care of. But where do we go if these are struck down? And the Wyoming Supreme Court rules that abortion is a fundamental right in the state of Wyoming. Now, before I go into that, the practical implications, what we might be facing as legislators at that point, something I've gotten used to, or I'm getting used to since I started campaigning back in May, is the natural, normal, and expected skepticism from voters and from listeners. I notice quite often whenever people make statements on anything controversial, it's typically met with suspicion. Does the person really mean that? What does this person really think? And this is partially the fault of having so many people who have campaigned saying one thing and then governed and did something else. I won a primary based on being able to convince people that I'm what I say I am. So when I speak about these things, I know sometimes pro-life people start to think maybe I'm a little squishy on these things. Maybe, I'm not a true believer in the right to life, because I do come up with my particular and peculiar look on the way people would like to legislate some things, and maybe sometimes see things from a different scene. So I feel to need to explain my history of how I was a pro-choice person and how I became a pro-life person. This is for the listeners who are starting to scratch their heads or, look out of the corner of their eye and say, oh, okay, maybe he's not really pro-life. You're getting the wrong impression if that's the case. I've only been married once, but I have been engaged to be married twice. And I actually spoke earlier this evening to my first fiance to ask for her permission to share this story, because this is a very personal thing. And this is how I went from being, over the years, from being a pro-choice person to a vehemently anti-abortion, pro-life person. We were engaged to be married. She got pregnant during that time. I never knew she was pregnant until after the pregnancy was over. Now, I was a young guy. I was only 22 years old at the time. I was just finishing up college. Maybe I was 23. It's decades ago now. And she told me afterwards, and my knee-jerk reaction was relief. Good. Oh, boy, I wasn't ready to be a parent yet. But something didn't sit right with me at that time. While there was relief that I wasn't going to have to raise a kid, our relationship started to fall apart after that. And it's I don't know how much of it had to do with the emotional turmoil of it, but I know she was under a lot of emotional turmoil. I, on the surface, was saying she did the right thing. I don't know if I necessarily believed it, but things fell apart with that. Years later, I met my current wife. We married and we have kids during that time. I found out that my wife now, when she was 20 years old, with her first real boyfriend, was pregnant. And she aborted that baby, I think, at the age of 20. she's never gotten over it. The damage I've seen from that, the guilt that she feels now that she's got live kids, realizing what she had actually done. Now, I know pro-choicers like to jump in. Well, that's her choice. People have the choice to do that. But I have, in my decades of experience with this, since I lost my first child to abortion 30-something years ago, to seeing the effects today, talking to my wife about it, something that happened to her over 30 years ago, I can't seriously say I've ever met anybody who chose to have a child and cried about how it was the worst thing they ever did in their life. And I know very closely 2 women who can't live down the fact that they murdered their own child, even though looking back on it, they didn't know any better. They were young. They were told it's just a clump of cells. It's their right. It's their freedom. And something never sat right with them. But it really sank in to me how it was an issue that I would tend to avoid because it's an upsetting issue. And I would always figured, well, the courts have decided on anyway. So pre-Dobbs, I didn't really even get into discussions about it in politics so much. I just kind of leaned on like, yeah, I think there's something wrong with it, but I never wanted to wade into the legalities. But I sat down and had dinner with my ex-fiance to catch up with her. And she had since been married and she had kids herself. And this is where it really struck me that it wasn't just my wife. She kept talking about her 3 sons. And anytime I saw her on Facebook or she shared a picture, she was with 2 young men. And I finally had to ask him, like, you keep mentioning your 3 boys, but I only see pictures of 2. And she looks me dead in the eye and says, that's because I murdered our son. And said it very flatly, but it just cut right through me. And she didn't say it coldly. She said it matter-of-factly as I saw she had severed her emotions from what she had to communicate to me at that point. That's how she'd internalized it. And all those decades later, that's what had happened. She was in love with a guy a long time ago. They had a boy together, and she murdered the boy. And again, I know pro-choicers will jump and say, well, that's her choice. That's her view of it. But that is when it really sunk in my 40s about just what a horrendous lie people are being told about what this is. This isn't about rights and it isn't about freedom of an individual because we're talking about ending the life of another individual. Medically speaking, it's ridiculous to say that it's part of a woman's body unless a woman grows a second head and a second heart and somehow has a separate blood system with different genetics. Or I have 3 sons from my wife. Or we're to believe my wife temporarily grew a penis 3 times if that was not a separate body. So what does that make me? Well, we were active during the time she was pregnant. Sorry, listeners, but that's the reality of life sometimes. So that's where I'm coming from. The idea of abortion absolutely disgusts me. It's one of the most abhorrent things I know in life, executing an infant because that infant is inconvenient, or the laughable idea that this child might not have a good life, so let's give it no life. I can't buy that argument whatsoever. And I wait for the day that we have like an artificial incubator and this argument's over where you could just make the poor kid at least a ward of the state and have some chance of life at that point. So that's where I'm coming for. I am viciously pro-life, but at the same time, I have political hiccups because I am so adamantly pro-life. And the judge actually in her decision used this as a weak point in the pro-life argument. If this is life, then why is it okay to terminate it if the father is a rapist? And that's where I come across as just like over the top pro-life for people, is I'm somebody who thinks a rape exception for abortion is completely nonsensical and belies the entire theoretical, religious, philosophical argument behind it that this is an innocent life. So if it's an innocent life, we don't execute him or her because the father's a rapist. We don't do that in any other circumstances. So I have all sorts of issues with ideas that we can put restrictions on abortion because it's only murder if it's under these circumstances, and it's not murder under these circumstances. So that's just a very long-winded way of just to let people know how sick to my stomach I get talking about this. So as somebody going into the legislature who burps in his mouth when people talk about abortion as if it's some type of wonderful freeing right of women and families, when I've seen the damage up close it does to women who have experienced it and went on to have children afterwards. And I know we could pull people out who say, I'm proud of my 37 abortions. It's like, well, when they're in public yelling that, they're not trying to convince us. They're trying to convince themselves. So I already see coming in the legislature, there are ideas for more restrictions on abortion at that time to make the business less feasible, less able to make money, basically putting abortion clinics out of business with regulations. I don't see that necessarily as a bad idea from a practical standpoint, especially if the state Supreme Court rules that it's a fundamental right at that point. Then we have to do what was done around the country when Roe versus Wade made it a fundamental right, somehow written nowhere in the Constitution. Neither was the right to privacy. I always thought that amendment should be added if we want it, because the judge can find a right that can lose it, as some people found out, is that restrictions make it more difficult and less likely to happen. Now, I look at it from a point of principle that it is the most disgusting form of murder on the planet. An innocent life that requires, at its stage of development, to still have to live inside another person, because it can't even survive outside on its own at that point. Yes, I believe that's a human life, because it's not a duck, and it's definitely alive. And as far as abortion being healthcare, I've never heard of any type of healthcare that ends with the intentional death of whoever's allegedly being taken care of at that point. If that's the case, then euthanasia is a form of healthcare. And if somebody's awarded guardianship of an elderly person who can no longer make her decisions, maybe, then according to this judge, it is a fundamental right to put that person down like a dog, because that's healthcare, to end the life of somebody at that point, if it's done by a medical professional. Or if a medical professional presides over the death penalty is now healthcare at that point. You're intentionally ending the life of somebody, and somebody who is medical training to administer some drugs to end somebody's life. At this point, now the death penalty has erroneously become healthcare under that line of thinking. So going into the legislature, Joey, I'm not sure what we're going to come up with. But one of the things I'm seeing is the idea that we required ultrasounds and making somebody go get a healthcare procedure and pay for one that they don't want to get. Now, an ultrasound is definitely, I don't think there's anybody out there on either side of the spectrum who would say an ultrasound is not a form of healthcare. It's not a diagnostic tool in the healthcare industry. I don't see how in any way we could ever mandate that type of procedure with the 2012 amendment to the Constitution, that somebody would have to get this healthcare procedure against their will at that point. So somebody might say, well, look, he's a rhino. And all I'm thinking is practically is, do we want to waste our energy running into that brick wall we already know is there at that point? Are things we could do that are more practical? Because if the goal is to save lives, I don't see how using our time and resources and energy to run into a dead end like that saves anybody, other than all it does is serve for political grandstanding, or maybe some pro-life PACs will give you more money because you voted the right way. I would like to find a way forward so fewer and fewer abortions happen and more people realize what is actually happening versus learning the hard way like two of the women in my life.
I was trying to kind of stick to the cold fundamental principles, need to focus on definitions, what the law says, but you kind of went a different way, and I'll start to shift gears because there are some things I'm going to say that'll probably get people to say I'm a rhino too, but let me address a few of the things that you brought up. The ultrasound issue. I think you and I are pretty firmly aligned on the concept, regardless of what issue you drop into it, that if you restrict something, you're allowing people to restrict other things. And if you compel something, you're allowing them to compel other things. This is why a lot of our good ideas for education really need to be tempered and looked at, because restrictions and compulsion, it gives them a lot more movement. We think we're actually reducing the ability to do certain things. And what we're doing is giving them the right to say, now your kids must say this, can't say this, must do this, can't do this, have to learn this way, can't learn that way. But you get to the next teacher and they're like, nope, I'm the opposite. They must learn this. So let me know if we disagree. But I think restricting and compelling, forcing people, especially when it's in violation of your own principles. We're arguing about not getting vaccines. You can't force me to take a medical procedure. But over here, we're saying now you have to be forced to take a medical procedure. So I believe you're right. I don't think it makes you a rhino. I think it makes you thoughtful because, again, we'll go back to the biggest pitfalls for legislators are poorly defined laws, poorly defined key words in laws, and ignoring or maybe not looking deep enough for the unintended consequences or the hypocrisy. So I think you started that whole last section of your comments with what might happen. What do we do if the Supreme Court upholds the judge from Teton County's decision? My concern is, can't remember exactly what you said, but the Supreme Court upholds the law as it's written, then we're fine. No, we're not. Because we still have a poorly defined law, no definition for healthcare, and a lot of other things we need to work on. I still think it needs to be tightened up quite a bit. But all of this is going to eventually go back to my biggest issue. What I'm seeing is the real problem is the lack of community. We don't look at each other and interact with each other the same way we used to. And the basic respect for life, which is no longer fundamental common sense. It's an arguing point of this kind of life is good, that kind of life doesn't matter. You can go ahead and murder all the human babies you want before they're born, but I totally support the federal law that you go to jail for 10 years and get a $250,000 fine if you crack open a bald eagle egg. Fundamental principles are there in law already on other things, but I still think we have some issues if the Supreme Court upholds the law as it's written. And, all the other arguments I keep hearing, this is about reproductive freedom. What reproduction? You have a healthy and functioning reproductive system that's actually doing its job right now, and you're trying to stop it. In my mind, that's not reproductive freedom. That's literally the definition of the word retardation. You are stopping or slowing down a natural occurrence. So I don't like the reproductive freedom argument. The bodily autonomy, okay, fine. You just want to be able to do whatever you want to do without any responsibility. I will accept that argument as your argument, but you just don't want to have any personal responsibility. But kind of back to what you said about, the death penalty. I don't know. The 13th Amendment kind of says some specific things about the civil rights of people who are imprisoned, not fully existing. It is what it is. But in theory, in posture, you're right. But also with what Judge Owens said, it's about saving lives and healthcare, and all these other things have got to be healthcare because it has to do with life. So did she also just deem suicide healthcare? Not just you having your grandma as a ward and deciding, I don't want her around, so I'm going to get a doctor to kill her. But why do we have the 988 hotline if taking life willy-nilly, especially if it's a life that you're claiming is yours or within your own body, is okay? Why are we spending any money on a suicide hotline? Why is suicide even a problem if that loss of life doesn't matter, according to this judge? The other arguments I hear, the economic or medical hardships of if you have a baby and you're not making what you consider is enough money, or that your child is going to have some medical hardships, you have children with developmental medical hardships. I can never get anybody to answer the question of at what point do we stop making that decision? At what point do we not just walk into a special ed classroom and just mow down the kids because, well, you got medical issues, you've got developmental issues. At what point do we not decide to get a bus and go downtown to the poor neighborhood and round up all the kids and say, sorry, your parents are too poor, your life doesn't matter? For me, the argument doesn't change whether the kid is inside the womb or the kid is outside the womb. And for everybody else, it seems to be that is the fulcrum of the argument. But they can never answer me on these other things of how old does somebody have to be before they're allowed to be poor without their life not mattering? And you made the comment again of just because you can exist outside the womb. Well, how far outside the womb? We're starting to get into winter here in Wyoming. And if you didn't have your nice government subsidized homes with your nice government subsidized windmill energy or whatever the hell people live on, if you didn't have four walls, a roof, a job, or welfare, heat, food, clothing, you wouldn't survive outside the womb either. Let me drop you right outside my ranch in the middle of Red Desert, Wyoming in February and see how viable your life is outside of the womb. So again, I think these are all real tangential arguments at best, and still all are based on a fundamental lack of respect for life, the right to life, the existence of life, the potential of life. It's not taught anymore. I think this is one of the reasons why we see so much polarization in so many other issues, not just abortion, violence, property crimes, murder, school shootings, any of this stuff, because we do not have a fundamental respect for life, which would, with it come the respect for other people, their lives, their property, And it's mind boggling to me that we have to go down this road on one of the most polarizing issues. And it's hard for me to talk about because I want to be that sledgehammer. And I've been told for years, do not bring up the argument that I'm about to bring up because it detracts from the argument we're trying to make. And you know what? I don't work for anybody anymore. I'm no longer allied with anybody else's, oh, that's a good argument for later after we take these first 3 or 4 steps. But if we don't define healthcare specifically in the law, we're going to have problems. And if we don't get away from, what was the argument for rape that you brought up? If we don't look at the law that we did pass, even if the Supreme Court upholds the law and says, yeah, Wyoming's 2 laws are good to go, that judge in Teton County is crazy, it does still have things like rape, incest, and life of the mother. And I'm going to get into those. First of all, why incest? Tell me one time when incest is not a case of rape. The only time incest is not a case of rape is when 2 cousins who are of age decide to have a sexual relationship with each other. And at that point, that's your decision. You went through school. You got certified at $23,000 a year to go through 8th grade biology. You learned human reproduction. We gave you a certificate saying you know where babies come from, and you engage in that activity. But any other type of incest, especially when it's adult to child, that's rape. So rape should cover that. And the fact that I've had discussions with good, strong conservatives who say, I want to leave incest in there because it makes it easier for people to understand that this is a problem. I'm sorry, I'm black and white. I want the words to say what they say, mean what they mean, and back up a principle. I would push back against your making it harder for abortion clinics to operate just so you could stop abortion. Not because I don't think that that needs to be done, but because it sidesteps the principle of promoting the importance of the respect for life. It's saying, okay, fine, we couldn't get it done this way, but at least we're saving a few babies over here. Yeah, still needs to be done probably, but we can't give up on the principled fight. When it comes to rape, I'll tell you very clearly, I have served in the military in combat with children of rape. In fact, children of rape who were born into very poor families, who their only way out was to join the military. And in the military and in combat, you're fighting for the people back home. You're fighting for liberty and freedom and all those things they tell you. But you're also right there in the moment fighting for the person right next to you. So if you're telling me that that life doesn't have value, it's not viable because it came from rape, I'll tell you, not only did I fight and defend for people's right to have this conversation, this argument, this debate, but I have put my life on the line to fight and defend a child of rape in the trenches with me, shoulder to shoulder, and that life is important, and it has value. And in fact, I've seen those lives have more value than a lot of the people I see walking around on the street. Life of the mother's a little different. And a lot of these 3 issues, rape, incest, and life of the mother, they're extremely marginalized. They're such a low percentage of the reality, it's ridiculous that it's a majority of our argument. But in even less cases, when it comes to life of the mother, is it because it's a viable pregnancy and the mother has to get the baby out, otherwise she's going to die. Normally, it's an ectopic pregnancy or something is going wrong with the birth and it is toxifying the mother's system, sepsis, draining all of her iron, other things are going on that's going to make that not a viable birth anyway. So, okay, fine, I get it. You're still saving life there. But as far as incest goes, no. And if it came to rape, I'm glad I'm not in your position. I wouldn't want to have to sit around and have the conversation about defining.
No, that's the ugliest thing in the world, because I would love to see it that we had much more stringent and quickly leveled penalties for men who commit forcible rape or take advantage of a woman who's incompetent at the time. We've had the discussions before about, unfortunately, what happens when people make up sexual assault allegations, and then it makes it less likely for women to come forward because they don't want to be doubted on top of the horrific crime that's been perpetrated against them. And I can't help but think, though, if we have a really strict law with a rape exception, that suddenly false accusations of rape might rise along with it as an unintended consequence.
And I would agree with that, especially because a lot of us have discussed a portion of the rape exception would be you have to file a police report. Not that you have to be able to prove who it was. It doesn't have to be a conviction, but that could be a realistic concern of unintended consequences. So the best I can come up with is, with that concept, we need to have more conversations. And personally, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a preacher. I'm not a psychologist. But I would always counsel a woman, if they ever sought my counsel, on have the baby, there are other options.
Yes.
But as far as just saying well, all you got to do is say it's rape, or you don't even have to say it's rape and you can murder this baby. I have some concerns about, but you go ahead. I think we're going to go a little long today, and I'm okay with that. I very much am. But at some point, I've got my might turn some heads with my suggestion on where we should go.
Well, what I will do as a representative is not the same as what I would do in private with friends or people who came to me. Those are different things, because my personal decisions, how I would handle things in life, are not necessarily what I would want to make into law to force everybody else to behave the way I do. So we come to really hard cases like that. Rape, I mean, just the horrors of a woman who's been raped and having to carry that pregnancy to term is, I can't imagine one of my daughters going through that. And there's also the other side of it. Does aborting the child make the woman ever forget how badly she was violated? Well, no, of course not. So those are discussions I'd rather just keep out right now, because I'm looking at this more from the position of a legislator, and the possible path forward I'm looking at right now, according to what Governor Gordon suggested, according to the looming threat of the Supreme Court making abortion a constitutional right in this state, would be to amend the Constitution otherwise. Now, that's been tried before in Wyoming, and it failed 60-40. However, that was before the Dobbs decision at that time, before it was actually left up to the states. That was also in the 1990s. Wyoming has taken a considerable turn into the conservative avenue since the 1990s. The 1990s was a time where Democrats were still viable in the state for the most part. I don't know where Wyoming would be today. So as a legislator, I'm inclined to vote in favor of an amendment to outlaw abortion in the state. And I know some pro-life people are saying, well, that's a danger, because what if people vote it down? Well, then they vote it down. But if the Supreme Court says, well, it's a right in this state, then passing laws laws can't override the Constitution. Only an amendment can at that point. So that seems like it would be the only viable path forward. But in the meantime, there's nothing to do really but to sit and wait. I don't see the point of passing more anti-abortion laws while the last round of them is still in the courts. I know some people would like to get those in law as soon as possible, but I can guarantee any more pro-life laws we pass will immediately be challenged and held up in court anyway, pending these decisions. I'm just hoping the legislature coming in stays focused on the things that we were primarily sent there for, which is like property taxes and getting spending under control. I'd hate for this to be a distraction, getting conservatives at each other's throats, and that we don't accomplish what we're being sent there to do because this curveball got thrown at us after the election.
And that's one of the reasons I hate that the judge retention thing is on the ballot. It doesn't matter which way we vote to retain judges. They're still appointed and retained by the governor. It makes it look like we have some influence. Owens held back this decision until after the election on purpose. I think part of it had to do with the fact that judges do appear on the ballot. Whether we're actually voting for them or not, that's a different argument. But it was set up for it to be a problem in this vein, in this time frame for you. And I don't know that we'll just have to wait and see. And I'm going to try not to get emotional, but I'm a little frustrated, a little angry, and very sensitive about this issue when it comes down to the finer points. You heard me say earlier that I'm not pro-life. I'm pro-innocent life. I'm anti-abortion. But there's another component to that. And I think in the meantime, there's a conversation we need to have, because regardless of the outcome of the Supreme Court decision, it should not be a black and white winner take all. You can or cannot have an abortion. Ha ha, neener, neener, stick it in your face, whichever side prevails. This has to be a principled and measured process, whichever way it comes out. And my biggest problem is, especially with the pro-lifers, which I'm not, I'm pro-innocent life, is I have not seen the movement from either side that declares itself pro-child. Pro-life, pro-choice, pro-liberty, pro-give me free medical care because I'm an American. But I've never seen a movement stand up, try to raise the money and attention that all these other movements do that says, you know what? We are pro-child. There's over 500,000 children in this country who are in institutional and foster care. because we have a piss poor adoption system. Abortions are cheaper than adoption. Somebody's out there trying to make money off of selling kids, and they can only place about 30,000 of them into homes a year. Our foster system is corrupt. Even here in Wyoming, every 15th story I see is another horrific story about a foster parent that did something bad to a kid, forced labor, sexual enslavement, basically running a puppy mill, as many foster kids as I can fit into my farmhouse so I can get all this money from the government. We've seen issues with the boys' school, all of these institutions that we have for these wayward children, lots of abuse going on there. It's problematic, but I don't think we should also be considering criminalizing abortion against the woman. The medical provider, fine. Think of how many more unwanted and uncared for and unloved children are going to end up in the system, like you said, make them wards of the state, if it is now a criminal penalty for a woman to get an abortion. I don't know what the answer is there. This is something that I think hey, okay, you want to murder babies, you don't want to murder babies. Let's talk about the babies that survive and the ones that hopefully will survive in the future when we start having respect for life. And there's a lot of unintended consequences, and a lot of people are so black and white, they're going to call me a rhino. I'm not saying we should continue abortions. I'm saying we have a greater responsibility. And this comes down to community, churches, charities, benevolent organizations, the people in your neighborhood. We have lost that. Yeah, it used to be embarrassing to be an unwed mother who had a baby, but you still had the baby. And the community gave you a little pity, but they gave you a lot of help. We don't have that anymore. So we must find a way to at least have the conversation about placing the suffering of unwanted children on everybody's agenda right up front where it belongs, and talking about being pro-child. Because it really is our responsibility, once there is a viable life, and hopefully eventually on paper from the time of conception, that we not only, okay, we're saving your life, now you're born, and then the minute they're born, we don't care anymore. No, as Americans, especially people who involve themselves like we do, we have a mandate to provide those children, regardless of what state they live in and what the law is, their guaranteed equal protection and due process rights under the 5th and 14th Amendment, their right to life, which isn't just their right to not be murdered and breathe and then be abandoned. As much as it is now the state's right to choose, it's also their responsibility to protect the life of the unborn children and the people they will become. And I'm not saying throwing a bunch of government money at a program, having these big old state-run orphanages. I don't know. And when I don't know, I'll say I don't know. But I know it's a conversation that's not being had widely. I know it's one of the after effects that really needs to be up front. And I don't know that all of the good answers are always going to come from our side. But I am kind of getting pissed off that I've been told in the past, do not come with this how do you take care of children who are unwanted argument, because it's really going to distract from the we don't want abortion argument. And I'm done. I'm not playing your game anymore. All you people out there that try to curtail me, oh, you're going to negatively affect the conversation about the legislation we want to pass. Well, the legislation you want to pass is good, but it's not great. It's gray. It's undefined. We need to have a universal pro-child movement on both sides.
Well, one part I'd like to get in there and say where, not necessarily where I disagree, but because I'm somebody who lives by that I'm regularly involved in helping single parents, families that have people with cancer. I'm always going out of my way to do what I can to help people in that regard. The danger of the argument, I know what they're saying, is whenever you say, we need to do this, we need to take care of kids, so many people now equivocate we with the government. And Democrats love that. You're pro-life until you're not pro-life, you're pro-birth, because you don't want universal health care, and you don't want universal child care, and you don't want everything to be taken over by some communist government, basically. No, we don't, because education and health care are too important to put in the hands of government bureaucrats at that point. So I agree with the argument that there are people out there who don't seem to give a rat's ass about kids once they're born, really. But that is not the overwhelming majority of people in the pro-life movement. I mean, anyone who tries to claim that Republicans this or conservatives that only care about them and when they're unborn, when they're born, they screw you because you don't want the government to take over their lives. Right, we don't. Life and then liberty, not life and then socialism. So I don't buy that argument at all from the left. that pro-life is anti-child in any way, because we don't want those kids to live under a totalitarian government that takes care of everything. And they could scoff all they want, but that's ultimately what they're pushing for, is when the government takes care of all healthcare and the government takes care of all food and all jobs and all security. At that point, it also then decides when you die and you're no longer a use to the system anymore, too. So that's horrendous. So I would encourage everybody who's pro-life to continue doing what you're doing, because the studies have shown, the surveys have shown, that pro-life people are way more likely to give to charities and support kids and support poor people outside of government programs than people on the left, who typically, according to these surveys, love to pontificate about helping other people. But all they do then is say, well, the government should do this. And I've got my firsthand experience of having a child who went through leukemia, a son who's needed open heart surgery and spinal surgery, a wife who's had triple negative breast cancer and had to have months of chemo and have a double mastectomy and a full hysterectomy. My family was in financial trouble, and everybody who gave money to me was a Christian, a conservative, a pro-business person, and everybody I knew on the left just gave me a bunch of crap about, well, the government, if we had single-payer health care, you wouldn't have to worry about this. No, my wife and kids would probably be dead under single-payer health care. I don't buy that argument whatsoever. So if anyone's going to call you a rhino, Joey, because you say we should take care of one another, bullshit. That is a basic Christian principle, is for everyone to take care of each other. It is not a Christian principle to vote for the person who's going to force somebody else to take care of somebody that they don't want to. We need to volunteer this ourselves. So as long as we stand up and say that all kids deserve a chance at life, no matter what the circumstances were of their conception, or no matter what their genetic profile says in an amniocentesis, that once those kids are here, people absolutely need to step up and help one another out. But that is not the government's job to do it.
No, I absolutely agree. And that's why I continually bring up communities and benevolent organizations and your churches. It's got to be localized. But my point is, and I don't disagree with what you said, but I want to see that push be as universal and as up in the front as the pro-life and pro-choice movements. You have to, and this is something we can do now in the meantime, waiting for the Supreme Court decision or whatever is going to be the next thing that gets challenged. And I also think a lot of people on the left have it wrong. I heard somebody say the other day, well, if the Wyoming Supreme Court overturns the Teton County judge, then we'll just take it to the U.S. Supreme Court. I'm like, you obviously don't know where this started, did you? None of these are ever allowed to go back to the U.S. Supreme Court. But it's got to be, I think, a more pronounced, and I'm going to lean on my side a little negatively, or at least a little more harshly, because I think we're supposed to be better, so we should be better. The pro-life and the Christians, hey, I'm not saying you're not doing it. I'm saying go out there and let people see you doing it. Make it part of your narrative. First and foremost, I want to let you know I'm pro-child. And with that comes not only the abortion argument, but education, porn in the schools, all these library issues. It goes so much further. But I really think it needs to be more pronounced, not because it softens our position on abortion, because I think it opens up a better conversation and you have more of a connection with people who may be on the other side of the abortion issue and say, hey, at least we can agree on pro-child, right? Okay, and how do we do that? And I don't know what it's going to look like. I don't know what's going to come out of it. I have 1,000 ideas that every time I think 4 or 5 steps ahead, I run into an unintended consequence I'd never want to deal with or be responsible for. So we have a lot of work to do no matter how this comes out. But the work we can do, teach your kids to respect life. Have some respect for your neighbors and their property. Hopefully they'll have some for yours in return. So you eventually get into that respecting life. If you can't respect life, respect property. And just be willing to have the bigger conversation. It's not about throwing a bunch of taxpayer money through the government at a bunch of programs that look like you're doing something. We need communities back. Yeah, we need churches back. I don't care what your church is, as long as it's based on the fundamental principles of don't kill, don't steal, and believe in something bigger than yourself while protecting and raising your children right. Be whatever religion you want. But I think there's definitely things we in the interim, not just wait for the decision.
Well, I'll leave it at this. This is not a job for the state. This is not the job for a legislator to come in and try and restore community. In fact, it's been over-reliance on the state, which has broken up families and broken up communities as more and more people look to the state to take care of them. they stop looking to one another. It is absolutely the duty of every conservative out there, any libertarian especially, to lead by example on how to take care of one another. Because the more we do that, the better job we do of taking care of the most vulnerable without just turning it all over to the government, to some bureaucracy to waste money and then fail everybody anyway. The less the left has an argument to say, well, the state should do this. If we're already taking care of things, then there's less of an argument to make for the state to step in and do it. The state's job, I would say it is absolutely the government's job to protect life and call a homicide and make it illegal.
I could see that. I wouldn't disagree with that. And how we put that on paper and get it enforced. You know, there's a lot of laws we write that don't have any enforcement.
Yeah, it's not that easy, I know.
Even if you have a good law, you know, the biggest thing is the teeth. What teeth are you putting into your Frankenstein monster there? We've seen it in the past. So we might get a law that passes that everyone's like, okay, yeah, you can leave that one on the books because, well, you can't do anything with it. But lots of work ahead, lots of conversations to have. And I do agree we need to protect life. And that's why I want to talk about it on this show. I know you're a legislator. I know Ken's a legislator. I don't necessarily want to see it from government. And if I do see it from government, I want it to be because it's become such the norm among the people. It's obvious that you would put this on paper. But we're not the government here. In fact, that's our tagline. We're not from the government, but we are here to help. I think we need to do this. I think we need to get the word out. I think we need to soften some of our arguments and our anger and realize, you know, I see Jeanette Ward and Rachel Rodriguez-Williams and a couple other people who I haven't gotten permission to name, so I won't, out there in Lander, at abortion clinics. Yes, protesting abortions, but still offering hugs and Bibles and pamphlets for therapy and all this other stuff. Just a warm gesture. So I know it's out there. I think we need to start advertising that, and not from an elitist standpoint of we truly do care, even if we disagree with you. And we have got to find a way to come together as being pro-child. But I think that's just about going to do it for this extra long. And we've delved into some pretty tough topics here in the past, but this one is another one that it's rough. It's emotional. There's a lot of feelings. This is why we need to have the conversation. Tom and I love having the conversation between us, but hope it'll include you here in the future. Tom, why don't you do your goodbyes and then we'll shut her down.
Well, yeah, thanks everyone for listening. I know there'll be some people listening to this one that didn't typically because they asked me specifically to send that to them. I'm just going to leave it at we'll do the best we can to protect life in the state. And that might not always be a quick fix.
And remember, folks, it's not always totally black and white. This is why I define it very clearly. Pro-innocent life, pro-child, anti-abortion. But I still believe in the death penalty. And if you want to break into my house, you might meet my friends Smith and Wesson. That does happen. It comes down to personal responsibility and respect for life. So call me a hypocrite if you want, but I'd be willing to have that conversation with you. Anytime you see me or Tom out there, make sure you're saying hi, and let's have that conversation while you're making that wide right turn into better decisions about life and community. And remember, we're not from the government, but we are here to help.
If you lie to the government, they'll put you in prison. But when they lie to all of us, it's called being a politician. You think taking guns away will save our kids from the killings, but you're pro-choice. Abortion kills way more children. If America's so terrible and racist, it probably isn't safe to encourage immigration. Just saying, all the contradictions are embarrassing. You know who hates America the most? Americans. But we are all the same. We are red, white, and blue. Ashamed to be American? Okay, that's cool. Because honestly, we are all ashamed of you too.
Y'all are so fake. Oh no, the forecast said that there'd be